Hi, my name is Haley Judd.
And I'm Jen Albee.
And this is Back to Our Roots. We're going back in time a little bit, and we're going to be looking at the Seventh Commandment. You shall not steal. This, once again, you've heard us say this many times, sounds so simple, but as we dive into the teachings of the church and the catechism of the Catholic Church, we see that there is so much behind the Seventh Commandment in so many ways that we probably fall short in living it out. So as we start our conversation around this commandment, I want to talk about something we've covered once before in this program, but it's the idea that while we are bound to the laws of our country, right, we're Americans, and we're bound to the laws of America, we as Catholics have a higher calling. We are citizens second and Catholics first. And this is going to be really important as we talk about stealing and property and economics and some of the things that come into play here. You are an American citizen, but first and foremost, you are a Catholic, and we always have to keep that in mind. And so I'm going to start by just briefly talking about the right to private property. This is fundamental to the commandment, you shall not steal. You can't steal something if there's no private property. And so we do, and the church does support, we do believe in the right to private property. But what's interesting is that the Catechism says that there's something higher than that. In the same way that we're not citizens first, we're Catholics first, there's something higher than our right to private property. And that's something called the universal destination of goods. It's the idea that God created all of creation for all of humanity. And so while you have a right to your private property, as the Catechism says, the goods of creation are destined for the whole of the human race. And so we always have to keep that in the back of our minds. I think a good quote from the Catechism that sums up this idea, it says, "In his use of things, man should regard the external goods he legitimately owns, not merely as exclusive to himself, but common to others also, in the sense that they can benefit others as well as himself." So while we do have this right to private property, that gives us the commandment, you shall not steal, there's this greater calling that we're called to hold our things loosely, to share and to understand that we are for the good of all humanity. And sometimes this can sit not super well with us as Americans. We really like our right to private property, but we always remember that we are Catholics first and citizens second. And with that, I'll pass it to Jen to talk a little bit more about this commandment.
Right. So, thou shalt not steal. Again, it goes a lot deeper. And you could argue that this commandment, this one commandment, sort of encompasses all the other ones. And it's open-ended. But first, with it encompassing all the other ones, thou shalt honor thy father and mother. It's specific to thy father and mother. Putting God first, it's specific to God. You shall not commit adultery. It's specific to the spouse. You can't commit adultery if you're not married. Coveting other people's goods. It's wanting to steal other people's goods. But this one is just thou shalt not steal, period. So don't steal anything, right? This one, it forbids theft. That is, usurping another's property against the reasonable will of the owner. And any form of unjustly taking and keeping the property of others is against the Seventh Commandment. Thus, deliberate retention of goods lent or of objects lost, business fraud, paying unjust wages, forcing up prices by taking advantage of the ignorance or hardship of another. So when we think of thou shalt not steal, you think of just taking somebody's things, but I think it's interesting when it says unjust wages, forcing up prices by taking advantage of ignorance or hardship of another. And that leads me to Haley. Back to Haley.
There's so many ways that we as individuals or as a society can fail sort of in this area. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about economics. The Catechism of the Catholic Church goes into economics when it comes to this commandment. And so you might think, well, where does the church's role, what does the church have to do with economics? And this is something we've said before too, but the church it's not an economic, financial institution, but it gets involved when it needs to. The Catechism says, The church makes a moral judgment about economic and social matters when the fundamental rights of the person or the salvation of souls requires it. So this is not the church's primary function to weigh in on the financial matters, but it does get involved when it's about the dignity of humans and the salvation of souls. And so there's something that I'm just going to touch on briefly called Catholic social teaching. And it's this huge overarching umbrella, this body of work that helps us as Catholics navigate social teaching, right? Economics, the poor, politics, all these things that's developed throughout the years to help the world as we came into the Industrial Revolution and new things were developed to help us deal with that. And it's a really beautiful example of what we call the magisterium, the church's living teaching authority. Obviously, Jesus didn't teach about politics and economics today, but the church has a responsibility to interpret the teachings of Jesus, the traditions of the church, into how we should act as Catholics today. And so there's this big thing called Catholic social teaching that we can't get into all of, obviously, but that I encourage you to look more into if that's interesting to you. But I want to go back to a little bit of what the church does teach about economics and some of the stances the church does take. And so one of them is about what economics and industry is all about. I want to read you this quote from the Catechism. It says, "The development of economic activity and growth in production are meant to provide for the needs of human beings. Economic life is not meant solely to multiply goods produced and increase profit or power. It is ordered first of all to the service of persons, of the whole man, and of the entire human community." And so once again, we see this higher calling that the church isn't against industry, economics, but it's saying that the purpose of these things is for the good of others. It cannot merely be for profit or power. It's for the good of all mankind. And so we as Catholics, we don't have to stay outside of these issues, but we have to keep our eyes focused on the goal. I think that in today's world, we're very profit-focused, and the church says that's not how we can live. The Catechism goes on to say, "A theory that makes profit the exclusive norm and ultimate end of economic activity is morally unacceptable. The disordered desire for money cannot but produce perverse effects. Every practice that reduces persons to nothing more than a means of profit enslaves man, leads to idolizing money, and contributes to the spread of atheism." Wow. That's a heavy quote, right? So we as a country, as a community, and as individuals have to ask ourselves, how are we simply chasing profit at the expense of people? And so the church does go on to say that we don't support communism, but we also can't support capitalism at its essence because it is so focused on profit. And again, we have this higher calling to think about people and the dignity of people first. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Jen to talk about what that looks like on a more personal level.
Right. So I love the whole dignity of the person, and work does help in a human's need for purpose. Right. We say that man is not made for work, but work is made for man. Right? We work because it helps us to fulfill a purpose. It helps us to support our families, and also helps us to support all those around us. The Catechism says, "In work, the person exercises and fulfills in part the potential inscribed in his nature." The potential inscribed in his nature. The primordial value of labor stems from man himself, its author and its beneficiary. This part of the commandment covers that everyone should be able to draw from work the means for providing for his life and that of his family and of serving the community. And I think that is, it's a different way of looking at work, like what Haley was saying. It's not all about profit. It's about what we can offer using our talents and the gifts that God has given us, how we can offer that in the work that we do, and then how that contributes to society, and how that contributes, on a smaller scale to the people that we are serving in our homes and in our like smaller community. I think the just wage is also worth mentioning, because that's a part of not stealing. Don't steal from someone their right to a just wage. If they are offering their talents and their gifts, then they do deserve to be paid rightfully. And the Catechism says this: a just wage is the legitimate fruit of work. To refuse or withhold it can be a grave injustice. In determining fair pay, both the needs and the contributions of each person must be taken into account. And I think that is it's worth looking at work differently than just like getting up, going to work, the daily grind of it all. If we look at it differently and we look at work and getting paid for the work we do as serving those around us, serving our community, and serving God, then our feeling about it changes. So that, pushing it off to Haley again.
So as we sort of wrap up talking about this commandment, I just wanted to say that there are real challenges for us here. You really will have to evaluate, how do you hold your private property? Do you hold it as being accessible to others, as utilizing it to help others? How do you go to work every day? Do you work with purpose? How do you handle the world of finance and economics? Are you living that higher calling? There are big challenges here. And I want to go back to a question we asked, I think, way in the beginning of our year, which was, if you were on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And I want to tweet that this week and just ask us, if you were on trial for being a Christian and the evidence was your work and your finances, would that be enough evidence to convict you? And I think that as we ponder that question, we can only grow in how we live out the seventh commandment. Jen's going to introduce our family video for this week.
So we are talking to Nathan and Sarah Warecki. They are both lawyers, and in this particular commandment, it also covers service to the poor and corporal works of mercy, and their area of work covers it. And so I think it'll be really interesting to chat with them. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
We'll see you next time.
Hi. My name's Nathan Warecki. My wife,
I'm Sarah Warecki. And we've been members of the church for about 3 years.
About 3 years, yeah.
Yep. And we were asked to talk today about the seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal, and how we live that in our lives, in our professional lives. We are both attorneys.
We have 4 children.
We have 4 children.
Yep.
And so
So what do you do? What's your job?
Well, I am a staff attorney for CASA, New Hampshire. That's court-appointed special advocates. They're volunteers who act as guardian ad litems for abused and neglected children. And it's a nonprofit organization. All of the guardian ad litems are volunteers. So I enjoy doing public service. My prior position was a prosecutor, so I took the thou shalt not steal very literally, and was prosecuting people for actual theft. But as we know, the Catechism goes much deeper in that, into poverty and how you live out your life by serving the poor. And Nathan, you do some of that in your work.
Yes. So I'm my wife has a background in criminal law. I've been in private practice for about 7 years, and I do a lot of commercial work, business law type things. But I do have a pretty robust pro bono practice. And in my past, actually, how we met was working with immigrants.
I like the way that the Catechism describes thou shalt not steal, kind of spinning it as less of like this person shouldn't take something that belongs to them, and more of like compelling people who have something to give something. And so I like thinking about that a little bit. I think what I really love about the work that I do and the work that I've done, and what always gives me a driver towards whatever job, career I'm doing, is, am I helping someone who maybe doesn't have a voice use their voice, or find their power to stand up for whatever it is that they need? And that's not something tangible, but I like that the catechism expands into those intangible ideas. So maybe I'm not giving someone literal bread to eat, but I'm giving them the power and the voice that they need to be able to stand up for themselves and get what they need that way.
Yeah, like the commandment, thou shalt not steal, it sounds punitive, right? It's a commandment to not do something.
Why are you saying punitive? Don't sound like a lawyer. It sounds...
It's a punishment.
Yeah,
it sounds like a punishment.
Yes.
But it's not. If you read the catechisms, it's a invitation to share what you have, because that is what that's what God wants. It wants you to use your. I think we've used in the church in the past, time, talent, and treasure. Use those gifts, whether they're monetary or more intangible than that, and share that with people who can benefit. And there's so many ways to do that. And we've been lucky enough to be in a profession where that type of sharing is encouraged. For instance, the American Bar Association's model rules encourage every lawyer to give 50 hours of pro bono work a year. And there's so many opportunities to work in public interest and in certain segments of the law, like your work with children. And so there's always a path to do that. And I'm encouraged that the catechisms, take a pretty simple idea.
Yeah, well, they kind of turn it around, right? Because it's less focused on, Jean Valjean shall not steal the bread, and it's more focused on Javert, you shall not steal.
Yeah, Les Mis reference.
Yeah, you shall not steal Jean Valjean's life away just because he took a piece of bread because he needed it to eat. So it's focused on not even necessarily charitable, but just treating everybody like a human being and making sure we all have what everybody needs. It's great living in New Hampshire in this state because the judges in New Hampshire always really want to make sure that they're doing the fair, right, and just thing. And justice is not about an eye for an eye. Justice is about outcomes, yeah. It's about accountability, yes, but it's about how do we all move forward, because we all still have to live together. So that is what thou shalt not steal means to us.
Yep.
And thank you for listening to us. And
have a good one. Thanks.
have a great one.